Welcome to IOE's Peer-to-Peer Dialogues, where we'll be examining the issues impacting the world of work from the perspective of business and employers. I am Jean Milligan. I am from the International Organization of Employers, and I will be one of your hosts for this series. Join us as we engage in conversations with business leaders, policymakers, and innovators from across the globe. This episode, we'll be discussing with Roberto Suárez Santos the issue of living wage. Roberto is Secretary-General of the International Organization of Employers and has been in post since 2018. Roberto, in an age where we're seeing a great deal of economic uncertainty and actually rising inequality, there is a political pressure now to ensure people have levels of decent wages. And we know that this has led to numerous initiatives, whether in the international setting or a national setting, to determine a living wage. And you also have now consulting firms looking at establishing living wage. So I would like to first go into first question for you. It's about, we know that the International Labour Organization, recently you've been negotiating the first ever agreement, as one news agency reported, on a methodology for calculating a living wage that governments and businesses can apply. Can you explain to me the substance of those negotiations and the position of the employers group?
Okay, well, the discussion on living wage has been there for years, okay? But also the discussion of wages. I mean, if you tell me what IOE in the International Organization of Employers has been doing in the last 100 years, we are 100 years old, I mean, it has to do with working conditions. And of course, when you talk about working conditions, you have working time and wages. So it's nothing especially new as a concept. In fact, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights refers to the living wage, I mean, the wages that can cope with the needs of the worker and her family. The concept of minimum wage was also linked to living wage. And I think that from already many years we have been agreeing on what a minimum wage is. And you have in many countries regulations. I think it's a great deal of countries already, a high percentage of countries that have already minimum wages. And you have an important convention on minimum wages in the ILO. The challenge came when you have global players, and when I say global players, I refer also to multinational companies that, for many reasons, including reputational risk, need to assure that in all their operations, the workers are paid a kind of fair wage. Not exactly the minimum wage, but something that they consider as fair. So how they determine that? They normally try to have an expertise through external consultants, methodologies, which gave or provided elements to define at different levels, I mean, in different countries around the world, what should be the adequate level of wages beyond the minimum wage. And so those initiatives that are under several names, and some of them are living wage initiatives, proliferated for coping with the challenges that you can find also at company level, companies that are normally acting in a multinational scenario. But the problem is that these methodologies that were used to determine, what the level of wages is in different countries were so diverse that led to a very uncertain situation. The ILO is very well positioned to provide some certainty in terms of methodology to assure, to define what is the level of wages that should be more adequate to cope with the needs of the worker and their families. So that's why we agreed with the workers to use a kind of more sustainable methodology to be used by different players when you want to define a living wage. But having said that, for employers, for business, it's also very important that whenever you deal with the concept of living wage, you bear in mind also that there are needs for companies, okay? Companies need to be sustainable. If the company is not sustainable, you will never have this level of wages that is desirable. So in order also to establish any living wage setting policies, you need to apply the principles of ILO, which means that you need to take into consideration also the situation of the company, macroeconomic aspects, because you need also to create employment and create jobs, and there should not be any incompatibility in terms of how you deal with wage increases and job creation. You need to deal also with inflation, because sometimes if you raise high wages, you enter into a dynamic of promoting more inflation. So all these economic factors have to be integrated in a balanced manner with the needs of the worker and their family. So this is the deal that we managed to got in the International Labour Organization. On one side, that the ILO takes the lead, promoting a methodology that can be assumed by different players. On the other side, to have the balance between the needs of the workers and their family, and on the other side, the economic factors, including the sustainability of the company. If I may add, also, it's also important that whenever you have a broader wage setting policy, when I refer by broader, when you have a wage setting policy at sectoral level, at national level in a country, there is a principle in the ILO that needs to be respected, that is, employees' organizations and trade unions are the ones negotiating that. Of course, and sometimes the governments also play a role, but these kind of bilateral talks, bilateral negotiations are critical, and there should be not much interference in these negotiations. So this is the other principle that also need to be accommodated. I think that's a package that we have managed to agree in the ILO recently, and that has to be endorsed by the governing body of the ILO.
Wait, can I take it back a little? So you were talking about living wage and minimum wage. Mm-hmm. Can you clarify the difference for us?
It's a good question. So the minimum wage is the wage that you normally agree at national level or sectoral level as the one that every player, every company has to fulfill. The living wages that we have developed is based on the needs of the workers and their families. So you can have a living wage that is higher than the minimum wage. You need to negotiate that with employers. You need to negotiate that with the representatives of the employer, with the company, etc. And this, there could be an agreement to raise it to this level, but you always need to do it through this negotiation, through this process of dialogue between employers and workers. So you can see that there can be a difference, not always, but there can be a difference between the minimum that everyone has to fulfill, and then the living, which is perhaps higher, but need to be also negotiated.
And so what you've talked about is to calculate a living wage, you need to take into consideration the needs of the worker, of the employee, but you also have economic factors for the sustainability of the business. Can you tell me what are the factors that determine on the employee side the need, and then what are the factors that you're assessing in terms of economics on the employer side? What, just some examples?
Well, the examples are very diverse. I mean, it depends. But one has to do with, the need to be sustainable as business. Okay, so if my situation, if my profits, let's be very clear, my profits are low, and that not allow me to make the investment that I need for the coming short term, then I have an issue, because I will not be able to cope with further salaries needs in the middle term. Okay. So this sustainability, financial sustainability of the company is very important. As you can imagine, a small and medium company, I mean, they have also to bear in mind what will be my needs in the short and middle terms for continue operating the company and to make the innovation, investment, etc. That's one example. The other example is I have also productivity gains, productivity increase that also I have to assure if I want to compete with others. So in order to get these productivity gains, I have to invest also in more capital, in more equipment. So that's another element. Another important element is from a I mean, you asked me about the employers, but from a government perspective, I cannot allow a situation in which I have high and higher and higher and higher inflation. So to some extent, we have to, in countries where the inflation goes 100% or 150, and you have some countries in the world, you need to be attentive to wage increases. And you cannot operate that, in a very irresponsible manner. But also you need to take into consideration that I need to create jobs as a company, but also as an economy. So if I need to recruit more people in my company in order to cope with more needs, but if I also need to provide more opportunities to individuals, I have to be very also careful whenever I agree with wage increases. So there is a balance there that can be found, but both elements, the sustainability of the company, but also the macroeconomic needs are important.
And so the negotiation you had at the ILO was really to integrate these macroeconomic needs. And that's where you succeeded. Can you tell me, though, a little bit what you think are sort of the criteria, indicators to establish on the employee side, let's say the wage level?
It's very technical and very, very sophisticated, if I could say you, and I don't want to bore you with that, but you have to take in consideration also of course, the basic food needs, but also your need to have a proper housing, but also there are elements related to educational systems, to education, also elements regarding essential services. And there you have a mix also of situations, because in some countries, many of the public services are already provided by the public authorities, isn't it? And you have access to education by public authorities in many countries with free access to education. So in that case, in those countries, the way you determine the living wage is different from those countries where you don't have even that. I mean, even the public institutions are not able, because of the lack of capacity, to provide these basic needs. So there are many ingredients in the way you calculate and you estimate the needs of workers, depending on what are the services provided by the public authorities, but also the situation of the country itself. I mean, of course, in Switzerland, the situation is very different from a country which is in a much lower position, in a least developed country. But the methodology that the ILO is using integrates many complex elements, I would say, and but it's quite comprehensive. Let's put it like that.
How do you think that this living wage, this new methodology that's been adopted and agreed upon, do you see it? How's the promotion going to? How are people going to be made aware of this? Because clearly there, as you pointed out earlier, there are companies, there are consulting firms that are promoting another potential methodology. So how is the ILO, how is IOE, the International Organization of Employers, going to also promote this methodology?
Okay. First of all, the methodology is being developed and it has been implemented by the ILO. I think it's in 4 or 5 pilot countries. So it's still there in the process of being finished. But once it is finished, of course, there is a promotion activity from the ILO. ILO has a powerful convening power because it's the authority that can integrate also the support of, I think it's more than 180 countries in the world, but also employers' organizations and workers' organizations. So we expect the ILO also to promote with all its capacity, its convening capacity, and it has a strong convening capacity, and that will be monitored, I'm sure, by the governing body of the ILO. But on our side, of course, in the employers' organizations, and also in the IOE, we are going to act accordingly. You know, one of the values of IOE is also that it gathers employers' organizations around the world in more than 145 countries, but also many multinational companies that are also partnering with IOE. So we are going to use our network, but also our employers' organizations to make our members and to make employers and business aware that this tool is very useful for them, but also can help to provide certainty in their wage setting process.
And can you tell me the final points, any sort of final reflections on what's the next stage? So you had a meeting of experts where you've agreed upon certain concepts and also a certain methodology. And what's the next step in terms of this process of taking this agreement forward?
There's several steps. One of them is finishing the methodology. Second, consulting employers and workers on how to implement it and how to promote it. And third, also to develop also the methodology related to economic indicators, which has not still been developed.
Okay, thank you so much for this conversation. I think we've explained to, I think, a wide audience this issue of living wage and also the challenges linked to it. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share right now or with us as we conclude?
Well, there are not, I think that the main points regarding to the agreement that we have on living wage that has been achieved in the ILO has already been conveyed. Perhaps what I want to put in value is the strength of tripartism, the strength of social dialogue within the ILO to provide solutions on a daily basis to workers and employers. Sometimes it's very difficult, it's very challenging to find a big consensus in the ILO because of the different interests, the diversity of perspectives, also within business. But once you have an agreement, the power of this agreement to have the right policies at domestic level is huge and can lead to an important change in the daily lives of workers and employers.
So what we're doing is, thank you, it's a celebration of social dialogue as a path really to achieve economic growth and economic equality.